Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joy Kategekwa, and I'm with UNDP. I have the pleasure of being your moderator for this session. That's all right. Thank you very much. So we were just about to hear from Grace Shemiridwe, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. And we want to hear from her what is happening in Uganda on industrialization? What are your priority sectors? How are you positioning for the AFCFTA? Tell us, Grace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kategekwa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege for me to join the panel this afternoon. And I'm pleased to share some of the initiatives that we are implementing in Uganda, especially in the industrialization space. So I will, if I look at the priority sectors for Uganda, we've got manufacturing. Yeah, so Uganda has a surplus of sugar, of milk, of maize. We have a wastage of fruits and vegetables. And we are looking at strengthening our manufacturing sector so that we can tap into the East African and African continental market of 1.3 billion people. We export our sugar and milk to Kenya, to Tanzania. And recently, this is the exciting news, when we faced challenges, when Kenya blocked our milk, it was interesting to find opportunity in Algeria, which has actually placed an order with us. When we look at the energy sector, we've got a surplus of hydroelectricity. We generate about 1,800 megawatts and only consume 900. And we're already tapping into the Africa Free Continental Trade Area market. We export to Tanzania, to Kenya, and we are looking for more markets because we still have a surplus. When we look at the pharmaceuticals, for example, Uganda manufactures and sells gloves, vaccines, ARVs, and we are already exporting to countries like Zambia, like Tanzania, Central African Republic, DRC, Southern Sudan. From a tourism perspective, we are currently in Kenya looking at what you are talking about, Dr. Kategekwa, in terms of leveraging each other's strengths. We are looking at, we are working with Kenya, with the Kenyan tourism community, to look at how we can develop products so that, you know, a tourist from Europe or from the US can come to Kenya and thereafter connect to Uganda, to Rwanda and Tanzania, so that we are able to issue them an East African visa. We have joint products in terms of destinations, so that they can be able to experience the entire East African region and tap into the opportunities that may not be in some of the other countries, for example, the mountain gorillas that may not be in Kenya or Tanzania, for the tourists who maybe land in the coastal region. We have also explored and strengthened our agricultural sector. We are an agriculture country. 72% of our population is employed by this sector. And in this area, we're looking at agro-processing, value addition. One of our biggest exports is coffee. We export 6 million bags of coffee worth 121 million. But most of this is in green beans, and the roasting happens in Europe, and then the coffee is sold in Africa as final product to different countries. But right now, we're looking at exporting to African markets. Algeria, again, is one of those. Sudan, until the recent civil instability, was one of our biggest export destinations. And as I mentioned before, sugar is one of those that we also export. I'm sure everyone is aware that our oil and gas, we are excited to build refineries. We're one of the countries in Africa that has actually built a refinery and is looking to exploit our oil resources. We expect an injection of $20 billion in the economy, which will certainly impact other sectors and create 30,000 jobs. Yes, Dr. Kategekwa.
No, thank you very much, Grace, because I think what she's managed to distill for us is demystify this idea that there is no industry in Africa. We're talking Uganda. She's taken us through agriculture, agro-processing. She's taken us through manufacturing in terms of pharmaceuticals, vaccines. She's even taken us to services, tourism. Now, we also know that even though the picture looks great from where you're shooting, Grace, the numbers are still low. This morning, someone talked about Africa in that 2% of global value added trade. Prof, you have to help us understand this question. Why the perennial 2%, and what are the sorts of policies, industrial policies, that can get Africa ahead?
Thank you very much. I think, let me continue from where she stopped. The fact that we are producing doesn't mean that we are producing at optimal level. The fact that we are churning something out doesn't mean that we are at what we call efficiency level. We need to do mass production, and that's the word for industrialization. We need to produce for the market. And yes, we will have to start from a little one, just the way she said. But what do we need to take note before we go into that? To actually do industrial policy, you need policy consensus. Because you need government, you need private sector, you need NGO, you need labor. So it doesn't happen automatically. There is need for long-term investment. We've been talking about that since morning. There is need for infrastructure, not only for production, but also to be able to trade at the most efficient level. The case of infrastructure is very important for regional value chain. The issue of trade cost, which is very high, can actually be traced to lack of regional infrastructure, or what to look at investment in those infrastructure. And remember, if we are talking about regional value chain, this is a situation where part of a product, we have to cross the border more than once. And the more you cross the border, the more you accumulate cost. So if we don't address things like trade cost, it will not be possible to do the kind of regional value chain that people are doing and are making profit out of it. So there is need for policies to address some of these things, not only trade cost. For most of the countries that we know, they've signed AFCFTA, they've deposited the instrument, but the implementation is where we are. The need to actually mainstream such agreement, not only AFCFTA, there are others, investment policy, into national development strategies. That is when you can guarantee that it will be implemented at all. So what we have now is we have so many instruments, we have so many people discussing about industrialization, but not in a coordinated version. For regional value chain, for example, we need a leader who will be able to take the risk, and we need suppliers around the continent to be able to supply. How do we know how much we need in terms of seed, in terms of rubber, in terms of glass? That is what I mean by coordinated version. Right now, until we have strong regional industrial policies that are being implemented, strong regional investment policies that are being implemented, because I know we have those policies in most of the regional economic communities in Africa, but the bane of the issue is not being implemented. Yeah. The other one that we have to take note is it is no longer business as usual. As latecomer to industrialization, there are some things we need to take into consideration. green industrialization is the end thing. We cannot pollute as people used to pollute before. We need to do what is correct. Then there is also the shift in industrial paradigms that we need to take note. Now people are using ICT to be able to not only trade, even production. When you are moving your good from somewhere, you can track your shipment. We need to invest in all those infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Prof. Oluwale, for giving us those 1, 2, 3s of what needs to be done to take industrial capacity up. I'd like for you to think a little bit about an example of where it's worked, so that when I come back to you, you say, for example, Ethiopia, and then you give us a bit more of that. But let me come to you, Pradip, because you are, from my own knowledge, the most respected sort of international thought leader on the question of consumer welfare. But you protect consumer welfare when you've produced goods that are on the market. And so I want you to share with us, if you don't mind, the India experience. How did they do it?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joy. I think in the last session, if those of you might have noted my remark on the PPPs issue, whether consumer welfare has been a particular goal of any PPP project, which is important, particularly in the case of utilities. Now, over time, we have worked with, as a consumer organization, we started 40 years ago. But when we realized that, as Joy asked me to speak about, is that all policies, all economic policies ultimately end in talking about consumer welfare or public welfare or business welfare, but ultimately it's the consumer or the citizen who's the beneficiary of all economic policies. So let us keep that in mind, and therefore, what we started doing since long is to look at policy issues, for example, trade policy, competition policy. We are well known in the African continent for having worked on competition legislation in about 20 countries of the world, including in Ethiopia, 20 countries of Africa, other than another 10 countries in other parts of the world. Then trade policy, for example. On competition policy, I was also fortunate to be invited by the the ECA, when they were developing the protocol on competition policy, as an expert to come and speak about it, just to give you a little understanding about why we graduated from consumer protection to consumer welfare. I mean, that is a distinction I would like to draw. That it is important for us to understand that all policy issues should end in protecting and promoting consumer welfare. And many regulatory laws, particularly that I have seen in many parts of the world, including in India, talk about consumer interest and marketplace interest very categorically rather than as a subtext. Having said that, let me, Joy, if I may, take the liberty of talking about something which has not been spoken about, and I think it's an important, opportune moment for Africa to look at. Is the G20 summit was held in New Delhi in September. And that is the time when African Union was admitted as a permanent member. And that means a lot of things in the context of what we are talking about as well. Let me briefly speak about that, Joy, if I have your permission. Yeah, a minute or two. Can't be done in a minute, I'm afraid, unless it was a boxing match. Anyway, now, see, the G20 admitted Africa, which was a very momentous opportunity for Africa to look at as something which is very positive, that there is a committee of nations of the world, and the next summit is being held in Brazil. And there are many issues which the African Union should look at in terms of mainstreaming whatever G20 discussions are and absorbing them here. One critical point of G20 deliberations in Delhi or in India was to set up a council on African economic integration as something which they can study and be able to advise African Union member states as to what should be done, and of which industrial transformation strategy is the topmost. Trade facilitation also follows from that, then human capital, smallholder farmers, agri. Now, if you remember, Another thing which is probably not referred to is if you look at AU's 2063 agenda, one of the things which is said very clearly is that the necessity of manufacturing-based industrialization in better utilizing Africa's natural resources. What we've heard in the morning in the plenary session, as well as subsequent sessions, is that Africa is well endowed in terms of natural resources in many ways. And how is it that we can, when we look at industrialization, we don't have to copy Europe or America or Asia, but look at an African model, which will be important. Here I'm reminded of one very small exchange which happened with the lady here who spoke about visiting the Ethiopian Leather Institute and looking at as to how they are processing leather with Ethiopian machinery. Now, mind you, let me underline the word Ethiopian machinery. So we're looking at appropriate technology is something which can be exchanged between African countries rather than to borrow, say, a machinery from Italy, for example, which may not be best. I mean, certainly not in terms of price, but in terms of the processing ability as well. And that, I thought it was a very remarkable point which the lady made. Is something which you have to keep in mind in terms of how do we deal with appropriate technology, which will be necessary, which will help Africa to be able to industrialize and to be able to overcome. Secondly, Joy, what is important is, let me conclude here. In the ultimate analysis, it's not just consumer welfare, but we are looking at jobs. Ultimately, it's the poverty which has to be eradicated and jobs have to be created. So we have to look at not only industrialization per se, but agriculture also in a big way. We heard that nearly 60% of agriculture, cultivable land is lying fallow in Africa, which is a great pity. And if you go back to AU's agenda of 2063, it looks at, talking about industrialization through natural resource-based assets. Let me conclude here and.
Yes. No, thank you very much, Pradeep, for raising those really critical points around domesticating, localizing, contextualizing how it is that you want to do industrialization, and such a powerful point about Ethiopian technology behind Ethiopian's leather initiative. And you also told us about tools, the PPP. So, Grace, I'm coming back to you to say, you've listened to Prof and you've listened to Pradeep, and you've given us a great story about what's happening in Uganda. But what are the three big challenges you're having to tackle? And how do you see government resolving, but also the international partners here? Grace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kategekwa. One of the biggest challenges, and Professor talked about it, is infrastructure. Uganda is a land-linked, we don't say landlocked anymore, land-linked country, which interfaces with different countries across all its border points. There's a challenge of infrastructure. The cost of logistics for most of our businesses, about 40% of the cost structure. So therefore, there's a challenge around access to the markets, connecting to Southern Sudan, to DRC, to Tanzania. And there's opportunity for us to actually build this interconnectedness through good roads, railways, water transport, airline routes, to ease movement of cargo. So this is a big challenge for us as a continent. Imagine if we had a connection from Cairo through Uganda to Cape Town, and I know there's a highway being built, but that is one of the challenges, infrastructure. The second is the regulatory framework or the tax regimes, the non-tariff barriers that the professor actually talked about. So we've got country protectionism across the entire continent. We have, of course, we know that there's been negotiated terms of trade, but the countries, again, keep introducing tariffs. Kenya recently introduced a 25% sugar tax on imports from Uganda, which impacted our exports and reduced our sugar export by 24%. And the same has been affected on milk, powdered milk. We see similar practices on paper, on textile, across different countries that are actually very protective of their markets. So we have infrastructure, we've got tax regimes, and then we've got competitive products from Asia and Europe, which impact the competitiveness of our own locally manufactured goods in Africa. Why is this so? Because of some of the cost of productions, like access to finance, affordable finance. The interest rates in Africa, or in Uganda specifically, are 20 to 25%, which means if you borrow your loan, if you borrow maybe $100,000, in about 4 to 5 years, that will have doubled. So that means your business needs to have doubled or grown faster than that interest rate in order for you to sustainably be able to pay it back and compete with other inputs from Asia and Europe, where interest rates are as low as 2 to 6 or even 8%. The other challenge is actually our, as a continent, inability to prioritize the areas where we are very strong at. So what is the competitive advantage of Uganda? And is that what we are pushing forward? What is the competitive advantage of Tanzania, of Rwanda, of Kenya, so that we stop fighting over maize, for example? If Tanzania is very good at production of rice, maybe we should let Tanzania supply the entire region with rice and we focus on other areas where we are good at. So that is another obstacle that or challenge, the inability for us to, yes?
Yes, we've heard your three, Grace. Very loud, okay. Very clear. Okay. I like that you have brought us home to many of the points Professor had made earlier. So I'm coming to the audience now for solutions. We're going to hear from you about where we go from here. So how can Africa elevate its regional value chains? There are people walking around with a microphone. I'd like to hear your views. We've heard the problems, we've heard the potential. Now we want solutions. So who's taking us home with solutions? Raise your hands. Let's go to the floor first and then we'll come back. Let's go to the lady Lucia right here.
I'm Lucia Nambiru from Uganda. As you see this flag, I'm the founder and managing director of enterprises. We are the best knitters of sweaters in East Africa. I've just come from Cairo. I came at night. I've been participating in the Inter-African Trade Fair. But as you have given us a question, I think we can talk words, but they are not in Rio, that they are put into practice. Let me tell you what I have experienced. I've just been in Inter-African Trade Fair. We got a lot of challenges. To get the visa to go to Egypt, most of the countries, they suffered. How can we do business within Africa when we still have a problem of visas in Africa? How can we do business? Even some people were denied to be given visas, but they had paid for the stores. And people paid a lot of money for the stores. For me, I took about 10 women. We paid $2,300 US per stall. But when we reached there on Sunday, they told us you are going to work half day up to 1 p.m. In the evening, there is security checkup. The president is coming tomorrow. The following day, remember people paid. The following day, they told us you have to come at 2 because the president is there. Yesterday, at the last day, that is when people make money. The last day they told us you have to finish at 12 noon. Let alone, they said at 4. What is Africa? Can we do business like that? People made losses. And for me, I'm in East Africa. I participate in East African Dual exhibition each year. But now there are no taxes because we want to promote small businesses. But here, they did not tell us about taxes. At the end of the day, they started telling people, you have to pay taxes, have to do logistics, you don't have to go with your products. Many people, they got tired. Now I'm asking myself, are we putting things in practice? Let us remove the visas if we want to do serious business as we are talking. Because most things we talk about them, but we don't put them in practice.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Thank you so much. And we will hear more from you in a later session. We're all excited to hear more.
Okay, I should stand. My name is Olayinka Banteli. I'm with ECA in the sub-regional office in Southern Africa. So I just want to respect and honor what our sister has said here in terms of her experiences, and of course, endorsing the position on free movement of people to enhance trade and industrial development in Africa. I think we all recognize that, but we need some brave countries to set the standards, and hopefully others will follow. We heard about that this morning. I think my point is really just reflecting on what Professor said and also Grace, because I think when we talk about industrial development, we often come to MSMEs. And MSMEs are important in the context of the informal sector, in the context of job opportunities in Africa. But if we don't get to grips with the missing middle for the large lead firms that can help us to ramp up production at a pace that's required so that we are actually truly competitive, the challenge of industrialization will remain with us. We cannot industrialize purely on the basis of MSMEs. Okay, as MSMEs are there, but we do need those larger companies. I think the other point I wanted to make is we have the research, we have the analysis about the sectors, but we know that there's going to have to be a great deal of coordination, even across the countries that we are saying are going to map into the automotive sector or are going to map into the pharmaceutical sector. There's a lot of collaboration and discussion that has to happen at the level of the trade associations, and governments are at the center of that process to help drive in foreign direct investment and match that with the domestic investment. But who is taking that role, and where do we stand as agencies to support that process? And I think that's a question that I would also throw back for some insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very rich reflections. David, you don't want to jump in for a minute? Okay, good. Anyone else? Anyone else? I think they gave us such a short time, so we'll have to wrap up in 10 minutes. But my colleague, please.
Thank you, Joy. And thanks to the panelists. Maybe you will allow me to, to speak in French. Je pense que depuis le matin, il y a beaucoup d'obstacles au développement industriel, à la création de chaînes de valeur ont été soulevés ici. Et tout à l'heure, la dame intervenante de l'Ouganda a parlé de quelque chose de très important lorsqu'on parle de la création de la zone de libre-échange en Afrique. On note de hausse de jusqu'à 30% de coûts sur les importations d'un pays voisin. Je crois que voilà une des manifestations évidentes des obstacles que vivent les entreprises en Afrique. Je pense qu'on ne peut pas réussir le pari de l'industrialisation sans ouvrir le marché. Tout le monde parle de marché, le potentiel qu'offre le marché africain pour le poids démographique, mais cela, on ne peut pas donc saisir pleinement le potentiel de ce marché-là sans investir dans les infrastructures, sans libéraliser les échanges, sans des politiques volontaristes, effectives sur divers aspects et soutenues par des investissements conséquents sur les infrastructures, sur le développement des capacités pour qu'on mette en place une industrie portée par les Africains. Et tout à l'heure, l'un des intervenants en faisait référence. Et je pense que cela est possible parce qu'il y a des pays qui ont donné l'exemple. Le cas du Rwanda, par exemple, en un temps relativement limité, on a vu le chemin parcouru et d'autres pays de l'Afrique du Nord le montrent aussi. Je pense qu'il y a des solutions, mais des défis pour les mettre en pratique. Merci.
Merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé les opportunités, surtout dans le cadre de ZLECF. Alors maintenant, c'est à vous.
Thank you.
very much for all of those reflections. There were lots of solutions in there, also reflective questions. We're going to have to start winding down before they come to kick us off stage. And so before I summarize, I'd like to give you 2 minutes, Prof, and 2 minutes, Pradeep, trying to sort of package what we've heard and send it home. What's your key message? Yourself, Pradeep, and then Grace. Hopefully you're still with us.
Thank you very much. But there is a standing question that I think we should not forget. What is government doing? What is government need to do more, and so on. That's why I started by saying that the first thing is what we need is policy, discussion, and agreement. We've seen cases where government will give private sector a kind of leeway that this is where we are going. And within a short period, the government will change its own. But the most important thing that government needs to face is public infrastructure, because there is economies of scale in government doing that. Now we are talking about PPP, but it belongs to government from the beginning. Yes, you can bring in private sector, but anything that has to do with public goods, I believe government should take responsibility for that. Now, I know that there is a session here, I think tomorrow, on special economic zones. Again, some government are using that to actually address some of the issues that we are talking about, infrastructure. But my concern about special economic zones is that they are now becoming military zones, keep off. That's not the idea. If special economic zones are going to promote development, then there should be a way of linking small-scale, medium enterprises to the processing zone. There should be a way of technological transfer. There should be a way of capacity development. But the way we have them, they are so isolated from the host economy.
Thank you for these ideas, Prof. And I think we will unpack a little bit more. Pradeep, I'm coming to you for a minute. Yes.
No, very interesting discussions. I think we need, Joel, we need a little more granular approach in all countries, particularly taking off from where Professor Olumala left. Of course, policy directions are very important. The trouble is that you often do get a lot of flexibilities in policies due to a lot of vested interests who are there, who are playing with it. And how do you deal with that? Secondly, what we have to realize, and a very, very important point made here, but that you can only promote SMEs if you have large sector there. Now, if you're looking at Africa as one country, one economy, then you have to look at it in this particular manner rather than through the national boundaries itself. That, you know, there is, the AFCFTA is supposed to be economically integrating the whole of the continent and therefore the SMEs. Now, the biggest problem, Joy, which SMEs face all over the world is something which has to be addressed. It has been addressed very well in India, is the credit. Access to finance is a big problem. And they often, you know, are unable to sustain their business because of lack of finance. What India has done has to, now this is where the state comes in, has provided an insurance policy to banks that, you know, this loan or that working capital funding that you are advancing to small industries will be insured by this particular corporation. And that is a way forward rather than lower this. So we have to look for innovative ways. And the fact is that SMEs provide on a per capita basis much larger employment, much larger export as well in all countries. SMEs play a very important role, and therefore there has to be a focus on SMEs. And once again, Joy, what I request is, quite often we've seen in many countries, many schemes succeed because of a champion. You know, a champion means somebody like Joy Kategawa, for example, being made responsible in Uganda for a particular scheme, and then she puts in her heart, soul, body, and everything possible behind it. Champions make a lot of difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pradeep, for those reflections. Grace, you have 2 minutes. Your take on where we go.
Thank you very much, Joy. I think the point about access to finance cannot be more emphasized, and access to affordable finance. We are looking at export finance, export insurance packages, especially in a war-torn Africa where some of our business, especially SMEs, have exported, and when a civil war erupts, they lose everything and go back to negative. So that is very important from our governments, but also our development partners in establishing that whole export finance support. And the other challenge for SMEs, we had a business summit with one of our regional countries, and one of our leather players got a huge order of about 5,000 bags, brilliant bags. And we could not find the other players to help boost that order. So there's opportunity to aggregate. So this is where we're looking for interventions in terms of aggregation of these opportunities, aggregation of manufacturers or business players in order to meet these scalable orders that come in when opportunity knocks. Also building silos, improving our post-harvest handling, and also having those big betas behind infrastructure. The professor talked about that in order to improve the connectivity to enable seamless flow of cargo across the continent. I cannot also overemphasize the need for harmonization of policy. We have maize in Uganda. We cannot sell it in Southern Sudan because of policy, because of regulation. We cannot sell it in Kenya. When the policy changes, our farmers are not able to export their maize. So these are some of the areas where I feel we could make a huge, huge difference. And then, of course, capacity building. Yes. And we did some work last year with UNDP, but there's more to do in terms of standardization, packaging, improving our packaging, quality of products, so that we can be able to improve the quality of products crossing the borders. Thank you very much, Joy.
Thank you very much, Grace. I think we've had such a rich discussion. We have hardly scratched the surface, but I think sufficient meat on the bone to tell us that there's so much more to unpack between tomorrow and the day we close. And just for sort of creating the umbrella, I'd like to attempt at a summary. The first one is that Africa is industrializing, and that's critical for the narrative because we often talk about it as if we're starting from scratch. Things are happening, but we must go bigger, we must go faster. And this footprint of what's existing is the wind in the sail that will take us there. The second point is that government policy is critical. We cannot do it. Prof, you said it's first and foremost a government job, not to trade, but to create the policy framework for industrialization. Many things spoken about there: infrastructure, the cost of trade, the cost of finance, pulling in investment, and so on and so forth. Consistent government policy is the second major point. The third one is we've heard about tools of engagement, and two things have stood out. The first one is public-private partnerships, and the second one is special economic zones. And we will unpack these things as we go through the discussions. The fourth point is around identify your niche. Each African country has a niche. So we don't believe this idea that we sell the same things and therefore can't trade with each other. So we can produce, but we must identify the niche. And the niche is so powerful because remember where we started, trade in parts. The other point is that visas are critical. We cannot trade, we cannot industrialize if people can't move. And so this whole idea around the protocol on free movement, a big boost needed there for implementation. The final point I'd like to make is around who are we talking about when we talk industry? We often talk about the SMEs. They're very important, even the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And then we juxtapose them with the big ones. But there's something in the middle, a powerful point that you made. And so we're really talking about big, middle, small. Final thing, and I'll close there, is we're not in the same dispensation as we were before when we used to theorize about these things, about how great it would be to industrialize Africa. The shocks remind us it's a necessity. But now we have an accelerator, and the accelerator is the African continent or free trade area. So let's industrialize to use it. Thank you very much, Pradip. Thank you very much, Prof. Grace, thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
you.